To this computer. Welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you happen to be around the world. This is the long-delayed Groovy podcast coming back again. I should probably stop commenting on that, but it has been a little while since our previous one. But I don't know about Sergio, but my schedule's calmed down a little bit. Maybe we'll be able to get on a bit more of a regular schedule. My name is Ken Kousen. I'm podcasting from Marlborough, Connecticut, and I am joined by the inimitable. Go ahead, Sergio. Why don't you take it from here?
Yeah, so hi everyone, I am Sergio Del Amo. The Groovy podcast, I have to say it's delayed because of my fault. Ken wanted to schedule an episode much earlier, but I couldn't make it. My schedule is a bit crazy nowadays, but happy to be here again. Happy to be talking to the Groovy community, which is fantastic. So yeah, let's get going.
Can I ask you a cultural question?
Sure.
Again, I'm an American, so my cultural knowledge is, well, it's better than most Americans, but that's a really low bar, Your full name is Sergio Del Amo Caballero, right?
Correct. Yeah.
I've heard that in some Spanish countries or Spanish-speaking countries, you have two surnames, one from the maternal side, one from the paternal side.
That's correct.
Is that how yours works? Which one do you use?
Yeah.
How do you fill in forms? What do you do?
Del Amo is from my father and Caballero is from my mother. And I typically, I don't know, when I am in Spain, I typically use both. But when I am online, I typically use only my first name sometimes. Sometimes a bit difficult in airplanes, boarding cards, because my name actually is quite long. So it can be tricky, but yeah, I don't know. It's the people from the boarding pass, they are used to, because it's not just in Spain, it's, as you said, it's in other countries in South America as well. So yeah, it's cool. Now you can choose actually. So before it was typically always like the father name first. Now you can choose whether you want your mother name to be first and your father name to be second. And I think the only requisite that you have to do is that if you choose one order, your second child has to follow the same order. So you cannot have like your sister with different order than you. But yeah, that's how it is. Yeah. But I typically go with Sergio Del Amo. Yeah.
Because I normally see you listed as just Del Amo. I rarely see the Caballero, but I do see it occasionally, and I just wanted to make sure I get it right, more or less. But okay, I was just curious, at any rate. Any rate, this is, of course, the Groovy podcast. Just a moment. There we go. Let's start off with one of the pieces of really interesting news. This was announced on Twitter, and of course, it's a big deal. Is that GreatConf is back? The great conference that talks about Groovy and related issues, but it's not just GreatConf now. It's GreatConf along with JDK.io, apparently.
Yeah, it's great. I think they were gonna do the same merging of both conferences back when COVID hit. So yeah, it's fantastic news. I saw that this yesterday in Twitter. And the call for paper is open. So I have to think what to submit. But hopefully I can make it. It's November 16 and 17.
Right.
In Denmark. I actually met Ken in person back in GRConf 2018, maybe.
Yeah.
Or 2017, when you were like keynote speaker. I don't remember the exact year. But yeah, it's great. If you are involved in the Groovy community, this is the conference to go, because yeah, it's a good opportunity to see people like Vladimir, who goes like every year, and all the people from Denmark who organize the conference, so Soren. So yeah, really exciting. It was. I know that Soren wanted to organize this for a long time, but with COVID, I don't blame him that it was so difficult to do. So yeah, absolutely looking forward to it.
Yeah, I saw the announcement on Twitter, and when I clicked on the link that was given on Twitter, it took me to the jdk.io website. And then we tried this morning going to greatconf.eu, and of course, both are taking you to the same place. So I think the last time they ran it, it was a joint conference. I didn't make it to that one, but I've been to a couple of the great confs before that in Copenhagen. And it was wonderful. I mean, a really good conference there. So I don't know if I'll be able to make it. European trips are always a bit more of a organizational challenge for me. But if you are in Europe, I hope it's basically an automatic that you'll definitely get the opportunity to go there. Incidentally, looking at the website there, and they have all the logos for the various technologies, Groovy and Grails and Micronaut. Did you notice they have the new Spock logo up there too?
I didn't notice. Yeah.
Yeah. That was something that came out a few months ago that I remember noticing that the Spock framework, the wonderful testing framework, when they went to version 2.0, I think it was soon after that, they announced that they now have a logo on there. And of course, if you're listening to this in an audible version, then we can't really show it. But I encourage you to check out. Actually, it should be right on the homepage, right? If I go to Spock framework,
it's like an S with wings, right? Or with ears from Spock, I guess.
Yeah, it looks like ears from Spock. Yeah, with an S in it. Actually, you know what? I don't see the logo on the document. Oh, there it is. So if you go to the reference documentation, right in the introduction, they've got the logo, which looks like Spock, and his face is basically replaced with an S. But it does have the Vulcan ears, and very good, you know. And I think in the release notes, they have a link to the person who created the logo. So there's an acknowledgement there. I don't have that handy, but and I think the person they mentioned, I better not guess, but at any rate, I thought I recognized the name, but I don't know if I got that right. So Spock has a logo, and also Spock is on the 2.x chain now. They're up to 2.1, and I've recently upgraded one of my GitHub repositories to 2.2-M. Is it 1 or 2? Anyway, they've got a milestone version out, and the reason I'm doing that, I mean, not just because I want to keep up with Spock. I don't usually go to milestone versions, but that's where they started to support Groovy 4. So I upgraded my basic intro Groovy repository to Groovy 4 a while ago and had difficulties with the Spock tests. But now with the milestone version, I can use the Spock tests as well.
We are in Micronaut, we are still living in Groovy 3 territory. And we are using Spock 2.1, Groovy 3.0.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we use. We test every module with Spock. I'm really happy with Spock. So if you are thinking about giving it a try, that's definitely something that for us works really well.
Have you used any of the new features in Spock? Any of the newer stuff in there? Has anything changed in your way of using it?
We use different features. So some of the features that I like a lot is we have a lot of tests that require like async conditions. So we use a lot of these polling conditions thing that you have in Spock, where you can do like new polling conditions dot eventually, and then you have a closure, and you can like I think it by default it waits for like 10 seconds to see if the condition days evaluates true. So that's one thing that I think is really nice in Spock, that you don't have to add like an external library. So for example, in Micronaut guides, we write them in JUnit 5 and Spock. And for that thing in JUnit 5, we are typically using this, I think it's called awaitility library,
right?
Which allows you to do this kind of async condition. In Spock, you do it directly. And what else are we using? We're using some in some tests, I think we are using the timeout feature, although I don't know if timeout is actually a Spock or JUnit. Now I'm confused. I'm writing so much JUnit 5 nowadays that everything gets mixed. But yeah, in general, we are kind of using the Spock features that have been there forever. But I am pretty much, for me, is pretty feature complete, to be honest with you.
Yeah, the only thing that changed for me in Spock was that when they went to Spock 2, they did, as you say, adopted the engine. They made their own engine for JUnit 5. So what they call JUnit Jupiter, the JUnit platform, however you want to refer to it, now they are their own engine, if you will, inside of JUnit, which of course they were JUnit 4 before, and it's JUnit 5 I've been very pleased with. I'm really impressed with the job that the JUnit team did in improving something that everybody used forever, and now they've made it much, much better. And I like that Spock is compatible with the latest version there. I know that JUnit 5, speaking of that timeout, JUnit 5 has an assert timeout and an assert timeout preemptively, as various assertions. But I think the timeout equals, the property and the annotation. I think that's unique to Spock, I'm pretty sure. But very interesting on there. So I did want to mention the Spock versions, and the biggest change again is the logo and the usage of Groovy 4, which presumably is coming eventually on that. Now, you, of course, are actually, what's your actual role with the Micronaut platform these days? Are you still the head of the platform, or are you a dev advocate for it, or what do you actually do with Micronaut now?
I am the lead Micronaut engineer in the object computing team. So that's the current role. The Micronaut core development team is basically two teams, the Oracle team and the object computing team. So I am leading the object computing team. I am still doing some advocacy things, but I'm a bit thin spread. So I try to do both things. But yeah, still involved in a lot of guides, advocacy. We have to actually pick up some of the advocacy tasks that are a bit on the side. I've been actually going to conferences since the last month and a half or so. I went to Poland, my first live conference since the COVID situation started. Was really nice. I was in Krakow, and I went to Dublin a couple of weeks ago to a private event for Micronaut and AWS Lambda. So it is nice to be back in conferences. Something that I definitely was not a big fan of online conferences. I think online has a lot of potential for training and things like that, but for conferences, I'm not really a believer. But yeah, it was what it was. We didn't have any option but to either do it online or don't do it at all. So
I didn't mind the online conferences, but mostly because I've really adjusted to not traveling. And I really have been enjoying not going anywhere, strangely enough. But the No Fluff events are now in person again, starting in April. So I've been to a couple of those. But speaking of Micronaut, there were a couple of major announcements on that. One is, of course, that the 3.5.1 version was released, and the other had to do with, so I don't think I have it in here, something about another sponsorship or partnership involved in that. Do you want to comment on either of those?
Sure. So since we last recorded the last Groovy podcast, I think we have released several minor releases of Micronaut, which is where I like to say that's Christmas. That's where the new features come in the minor releases. So we have a couple of new partners. We have JetBrains, who has been long supporting the Grails community and the Grails team at Object Computing for a long time.
Right.
And they have been supporting as well the Micronaut team since we started with Micronaut. So we have been able to use, for example, IDEA ultimate licenses and things like that. And they have really supported the community in general. So they are now official partner for both the Grails and the Micronaut foundations. So that's really exciting. We have another quite exciting partner, which is actually quite an interesting company. Is this company in Germany? They're called MicroStream, and they do a pure Java serialization engine So if you have never heard about them, the idea is that instead of using a database, you have like your Java objects in kind of a graph, and you can persist them to disk. So instead of using like Java serialization, they have like their own serialization built, and it works really nice. It is kind of a paradigm change because you don't have to, it's really fast, as you can imagine, because you don't have to go to a database and come back. You just essentially like, when you are like working with a collection, you have like to, so what we have done with them is we have worked to integrate that with Micronaut. So you can use MicroStream with a Grace application, a Spring Boot application, or any Java application. So it's not tied to Micronaut, but we have added some convenience things to Micronaut so that you can like configure it easily, and you can use MicroStream also as a cache implementation as well. And we have added a notation so that you can say like store this parameter or store this return type. But essentially it's really nice because it's like you forget about persistent gets out of the way. We have actually a guide which shows how to use it. So I will include that in the show notes. That's homework for me, but they are really interesting. I'm going to be talking in a conference in September, which is an online conference, speaking about online conferences. And I have a talk about Micronaut and MicroStream. So I will give you those links for the show notes, but they are really interesting, and they are like what we call like an open source partner of the Micronaut Foundation. And if anyone is interested, check it out because it's really something that is nice. And speaking about features, so we released Micronaut 3.5 and Micronaut 3.4, I think, since we talked. They are full of features. So as we were discussing for MicroStream, we have a new module. We have a really nice integration with CDK. CDK is this thing from Amazon, from AWS. It stands for Cloud Development Kit, and the idea is that you using like objects, like Java objects, you define your infrastructure, and they generate essentially I don't know, you can say like create a database and a Lambda function and this load balancer with code, with Java code, with ID autocompletion and things like that. And they essentially generate like a YAML file, which is actually so instead of typically when people talk about the infrastructure as code, that basically means like a YAML file with some Terraform script or some CloudFormation script, right? And YAML file the problem with that is that it's a bit difficult to write, right? Because that's prone to error, and you will really have to know the syntax of those infrastructure of code things. And with CDK, has really nice like autocompletion and things like that. At least for me, it really clicks for me in my brain. So we have integration with that in Micronaut Launch. We have support for the latest GraalVM feature. We have a new, actually, for people like me who create a lot of Micronaut applications on a day-to-day basis, we have a new CLI command called mncreate, which is like an interactive prompt, which will guide you through creating a Micronaut application. We are now integrating also features from the community. So for example, the Agora Pulse, this company in France, who is a friend of the Grails and Groovy community for a long time, the company where Vladimir works and where Simon works. They have a couple of Micronaut libraries, so you can select those in Micronaut Launch. One of those libraries is called Groove, which is this kind of, how do they define it? It's like an interaction texting library, kind of where you define, you have, when I hit this endpoint, I expect this JSON to be there. Things like that. So you can select those. We have improvements in Micronaut data. We have support from MongoDB in Micronaut data. So many features. One of the features that I am really excited about is our integration with Turbo. We are going to release a big guide and some blog posts within the next days. So hopefully people can check that out. But yeah, in general, quite busy with Micronaut. A lot of new things. And yeah, the best place to keep up to date is probably our website. So either the blog and Micronaut guides, and hopefully we are able to record Micronaut podcast episodes soon, which I really enjoyed, and we have made kind of a long break, and hopefully we can resume that soon.
Well, on the show notes, we've included a link to the YouTube channel and the podcast and the Twitch channel, of course. But what I try to update each time is the most recent list of Micronaut guides, but it's difficult to keep up with that because it's so active. So if you want to add a couple more to that or whatever, of course, feel free. I didn't see anything on the microsim database yet.
The microsim, we have one guide. I will include. We published actually one guide yesterday, which is quite interesting. Is you have a Spring Boot application in the sense of all Java code using Spring Boot annotations. So what you are used to REST controller, configuration properties, the Spring Boot one. So everything as you will have in a Spring Boot application, and you essentially at build time compute it into a Micronaut application.
Oh, wow.
So it's the same Spring Boot code, but compute it into a Micronaut application. And that's quite interesting. We had for a long time a Micronaut Spring module, but we want to double down on that and make the transition from companies who have some parts of the code base they use in Spring and Spring Boot to Micronaut easier. So that's something that you can expect from us in the future. And that's something that I am seeing more and more when I talk to clients, like people like have like a mix of code bases with some old applications running in Spring and some new applications written in Micronaut, and they want to sometimes use some libraries from one into the other one and vice versa. So yeah, it's exciting.
What's the Java version that you use as a baseline inside of Micronaut?
We are still supporting Java 8. We have like an issue actually to discuss whether we will drop 8 and 11 or only 8. So I think you can expect that Micronaut 4 will drop 8 for sure, I would say. Not decided yet, but that's probably coming. I will drop support for 8 and whether to drop support for 11 and just support 17 or higher. That's something up to debate. Micronaut 4 will be out late this year. Not sure if we will be like in the last quarter or in September, probably last quarter. But that's something we have to decide. So if anyone in the community has opinions, please search for in Micronaut core issues. There is like something like considering JDK, something like that. Let me search for the name of the issue.
Yeah, each of the frameworks is going through this debate now. I mean, this year seems to be the year. Pardon me?
It is a difficult debate because there are things such as cloud vendors support for JDK 17, which is still not 100% there. So we have to think. I mean, they are working on that, absolutely. So it is the problem is whether how to align. And then it's some people will be, of course, whenever you drop like a JDK version, some people will be affected, even if all cloud vendors support it. But I think for now, for us, at least my personal opinion, not sure what we will do as a framework, but my personal opinion is that if all the cloud vendors already support JDK 17, then it will be safer for us to say, okay, we support only JDK 17, right?
Well, now I expect that most cloud vendors will support 17. And I think most of them already do. I don't know if all of them do, but the major ones seem to have it. The question is really more of a minimum, and Java 8 is seriously old now and has a lot of limitations to it, especially regarding security issues. And this, according to the latest survey I saw, which is a couple months ago, the one from New Relic, you probably saw that go around. The survey results suggested that the number of Java 11 installations has finally exceeded the number of Java 8 wants. Now that's a somewhat self-selecting audience. The survey results came from people who already decided that. And Java 17 was tiny in terms of market share, but growing very rapidly. But if you grow from one, it's any growth at all is going to seem really large. I know a lot of companies who are transitioning this year, and they're going through the debate of whether they should go to 11 or 17. It's a source of some mild frustration of the Java team that they're only going to long-term support versions. It's like the Java team is a little frustrated by the fact that a lot of Java developers are treating the versions that aren't long-term support as though they're betas, when in reality they are fully realized, fully released Java versions, just only with 6 months of support associated with them. I know that the Spring people, you mentioned Spring specifically, Spring 6, when that comes out toward the end of this year, Spring 6 and Spring Boot 3 are good. That's going to be the first major framework I know of that's going to require Java 17.
And it's the biggest framework. So they are going to for sure push the industry forward, because
that's a bold move. I mean, that's a risk. They are the market leader, and it's very nice that Micronaut has an easy transition path from that. But to mandate Java 17, I mean, are companies going to just go, yeah, no, we're not doing that? Or are they going to look at alternatives? Or are they going to say, yeah, all right, well, this is the opportunity? I mean, the upgrade path from 11 to 17 it was trivial. It didn't remove anything. It only added anyway. But we'll have to see if companies do jump on the bandwagon or not.
But I think VMware is going to support the Spring Boot 2 as well. So I may have the resources to support both. So I think if companies want to stay in Spring Boot 2 and just keep using JDK 11, that should be fine. So I think it's great that they are like pushing the industry forward, because they are like kind of the Apple of the JVM frameworks, right? So if they go like only 17, they are like making the decision easier for all the smaller frameworks such as Micronaut or Quarkus or any other framework, right? This is like kind of Apple saying like they support USB-C or something like that, right? So it's kind of like a signal for the industry, like we should go as high as we can with JDKs. Speaking of what you just said about people like treating like only like working with LTL releases, the frameworks, we are probably like responsible as well, like so we kind of build only like for those LTS releases, so we really don't test, for example, in like I don't know, I don't think we never tested with non-LTS versions,
right?
And I think in a starter in Micro Launch, I don't think you can select like I think you can select only LTS releases.
Well, I think there's a drop down where you could pick alternatives, but the Grails people were debating that as well. I've seen that as an active area of discussion as to what minimum level of JDK they're willing to support, especially when they move to Grails 5 or whatever, and then they're going to have to really make a decision there. So it'll be something worth watching. And of course, as you say, VMware will continue to support Spring Boot 2 and Spring 5. I'm sure that'll continue on. But they're going to make a serious push. I mean, they've even posted blog posts recently justifying the decision and claiming how popular it was, which to me sounded like, I mean, I don't want to call it propaganda, but it was wishful thinking, I think. I mean, I think they're going to get a lot of pushback when they actually do make that decision. But we'll see. I mean, because that's also for the Spring people. I assume this will affect Micronaut as well. That's when they're going to move to the latest Jakarta EE versions as opposed to the Java EE versions, with all that chaos as well. Are you having to deal with any of that yet?
We have not completed the whole thing, but we have replaced many of, so we are using many places the Jakarta annotations already. But we still have some places. I think the constraints, we are still using the JavaX imports. There are a couple of places,
Yeah, for the people who are not familiar with that scenario, that drama, Oracle seems to be really uninterested in maintaining an enterprise version of Java anymore. They really don't care about it. They have their cloud provider, but all they really want to produce is the JDK and really the JDK specification, and then have everybody else produce versions of it. So they took the Java Enterprise Edition and basically handed it to the Eclipse Foundation. They made it, what is it, EE for J, I think, Eclipse Enterprise for Java, something like that, gave it to them. And then when Eclipse went to make the new version of this, when the people associated with Eclipse went to revise versions of the Java EE individual specs, that's when Oracle stepped in and said, yeah, now you can't call your packages Java dot whatever or Java X dot whatever, because that's our trademark. And they're like, but people are like, but you gave this to us. I mean, this is your idea. And they're like, yeah, I know, but you still can't use it. And therefore, there's this massive renaming as part of the Java EE version change. So instead of using Java dot whatever or Java X dot whatever, it's going to be Jakarta dot whatever, named after the capital of Indonesia on the island of Java. But it's like they created the chaos, and now they're forcing everybody to update as a result of it. So, I mean, but I don't think it's actually changing the implementations. It's just a big giant renaming.
Yeah, hopefully it's the changes required in your applications that are like lower than they seem. So it's, as you said, it's mostly like just renaming some imports and using Jakarta.
But you can't mix them. I mean, you kind of have to do everything at once. And that's where life is getting kind of chaotic. But that's when Spring moves to 6, when Spring Boot moves to 3, that's a big part of it. Is they're going to be adopting all the Jakarta namespaces and all those implementations. And we'll see what impact that has, if any. But at any rate, so that's it's interesting to hear that Micronaut is so active among the various projects in the Groovy ecosystem. This is probably one of the most. I noticed that Graham,
very active.
Very active. Graham Roche is giving multiple Micronaut talks in many places. Of course, he works for Oracle now. Still find that strange, but okay. And the one that I have listed here is that he's actually going to be giving a talk at, you mentioned conferences in Poland. So he's
going to be
doing
talking
a talk,
DevOps.
he's
which is like DevOps
Poland. I think that's in a couple of weeks, right?
Like I think 20... maybe next week even.
Yeah. And then you're giving a Micronaut talk at JBCN Conf, the one in.
And Graham as well. I think I will meet Graham in person in Barcelona. That's gonna be in July. Yeah, we have a talk I have a Micronaut security talk, and Graham has I think Micronaut and Groovy VM talk in Barcelona. That's cool. I live like 600 kilometers away from Barcelona, or 500, but I have not been in Barcelona for a long time. Fun enough, even if I have a lot of family. I have like 5 uncles living there. So I will try to like visit some family there.
Unless there's people you're trying to avoid, right? No, sorry.
Unless there are family members that I am trying to avoid, exactly. So yeah, that's in July. We are also doing, and excuse the self-promotion, we are doing an online training about Micronaut and Lambda in July as well. That's
now Lambda's an overloaded word. So which Lambda are you referring to?
AWS Lambda.
Okay, that's what I thought.
AWS Lambda, the serverless function as a service solution from AWS, not the Java Lambda construct.
Well, did you notice? I mean, that again was in the news. It's not the Java Lambda that I'm even thinking of conflicting with. It's that Google AI one that you heard about that Google employee who got let go because he thought that their AI became sentient, you know?
No,
oh yeah, and their internal system, it's called Lambda again. So there's another usage of the word Lambda, and he claimed that it's actually alive and that they need to get permission to do any testing on it. And it's just a piece of software. I mean, you know, you look at like if you're ever worried about general AI, look at your YouTube recommendations and say, wow, you know, I mean, we are so far from anything like that. And yet again, they just love to use they overloaded the keyword Lambda again, and here we are.
Yeah, I just have the blog post open.
So anyway, yeah, feel free to add the training class to the show notes as well. That would be very nice. And as you mentioned in passing, I should point out we have something in the show notes about the release from the Grails Foundation about JetBrains becoming a tools and infrastructure partner for them as well. There wasn't a lot of activity that I was able to track down in Grails specifically, but that was an announcement, and I did want to bring that up. And also, speaking of Spock, back when we were covering that, I should also mention, again, this was a little while ago, but our friend Trisha G, who's a Java champion and independent now, she updated the Spock tutorial that was prepared with IntelliJ in mind, IntelliJ idea. So there's a lot of activity there.
Speaking of Trisha, I bought her.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I was actually quite a fan of this of the second edition of Head First Java. I actually learned Java with that book. So when I saw that she was like co-author in the third edition, I bought it. Yeah, big fan of Head First books. And yeah, I had to have it.
That's been an adventure. I mean, the Head First Java, of course, created the whole what turned out to be a series, and it was Kathy Sierra and Bert Bates, and especially Kathy Sierra's alternative approach to learning. And the reputation of the Head First books is that there were wonderful books for learning, not really great references. They weren't designed for that. They're designed to make it. They've got puzzles, they have cartoons, they have little exercises with mix and match and writing things together. I like the Head First Java book, and of course then the second edition came out, but the second edition was on Java 5, just to give you an idea how old that was. And ever since then we've been waiting for an update.
We are dating ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I knew that Trisha was working with Kathy and Bert Bates to actually finally do the update, but this has been years, and then they finally did it, and that will suddenly become the definitive beginner reference for Java, or beginner tutorial, I guess I should say.
Yeah, so I have not read it fully, but it has like it covers JDK 17 as well, so it covers records and all the new features
and sealed classes and all those different. Yeah, very good. I mean, I read Head First Android development. I was a reviewer on that with the Don and Dave Griffiths wrote that one. And then of course there was, and I suppose this will be the big event in our podcast, there was Head First Kotlin as well. So there's your first.
Yeah, I have not read that one. There is another one really good Java book, which is Head First Design Patterns or something like that in Java, or Java Pattern or something like that.
It's design patterns,
which is probably a bit outdated now because some of those patterns were based on, as you were saying, like old Java where no lambdas were available, something like that, no stream API, and
many of those book. Right, many of those patterns just kind of vanish once you have lambdas, so it'll be interesting to see if they ever update that one. Anyway, getting back to the Groovy world, there's no Head First Groovy, by the way. I did once actually talk to them about that years and years ago, but I don't know of anybody following up on that anymore. Groovy is currently on 4.0.3. They released another minor version with a bunch of bug fixes and improvements, but Groovy 4, the big issue there, of course, is that they've switched their coordinates from org.codehouse.groovy to org.apache.groovy, which is basically the last step in the conversion to becoming an Apache project. But then it supports everything. It supports the switch expressions from Java, the sealed classes and interfaces, and native records, and everything. And the other thing it adds, by the way, the one that I'm interested in watching the community react to is Jink, right? GINQ, that the Groovy integrated query language. I assume that's pronounced Jink. I'm not sure how else I'd pronounce it. But there were a couple of blog posts and videos talking about that recently. I saw that Jink for the Win one by somebody named Rick Scarborough, who I didn't know, put in a few examples on how to use Jink. The basic concept behind Jink is that you can use SQL-like queries on non-SQL based data structures. So you could do SQL queries on JSON data, for example, JavaScript object notation, and things like that. And I know that it's been a while since this has come out, but it's taking a little while to filter through the community. Our friend Shimon Stepniak had a very nice video, a YouTube video called "These 10 New Features Make Groovy 4.0 Awesome."
An amazing video.
Oh yeah, well he's quite the.
He's a professional YouTuber. It's unbelievable. He has like the sound effects, everything. It's like wow.
And that video is part of a playlist. Like he has a whole series. He's got one on Jink. He's got one on, well, many of the individual new features as well. So if you're interested in what's going on in the Groovy community with a lot of that, then that's a very good series of videos to watch. I think there was something else on that. I guess I just mentioned that Paul King, of course, the head of the Groovy project, has been, of course, extremely active, and he did a talk at your area, right? He did the Groovy 4 talk at the Madrid GUG, the Groovy user group there.
Yeah, he did a talk in the Madrid Groovy user group. So Madrid Groovy user group is still really engaged. They did a live meetup last week, which I couldn't attend, but it is going back to in-person events again.
Yeah, you were avoiding your family again. Is that the idea?
Yeah, the Madrid is in Madrid, so I actually have relatives there as well, but I was not avoiding them. But Paul was, I think, a month ago or so, and he of course, he didn't come to Madrid to talk. It's like an online talk. And he wrote a blog post as well, I think, or was maybe.
Well, he made his slides available, the Groovy 4 update slides. And if you know anything about Paul King, you always want access to his slides, because he always includes way more stuff in the slides than he has time to cover in any given talk. And those slides, I mean, I remember I have the scars from when I was writing my Making Java Groovy book years ago. It's that I would spend all this time investigating this feature in Groovy, and then I would do what I should have done, which is to look and see if Paul had a presentation on it. And of course, he had a presentation where he covered everything in much greater detail than I ever imagined, just over and over again. So at any rate, I do recommend taking a look at his slides just to see what's going on. He also is one of those, quiet geniuses that has a way of making everything seem incredibly simple. I ran into that myself just as a personal story. I spent a little time working with an AI technique known as genetic algorithms. It's basically a nonlinear optimization technique. And I was struggling with this really impressive piece of open source software called Genetics that starts with a J. It's Genetics with a J is a project that does genetic algorithms using Java 17, believe it or not. I mean, it's got all the Java 17 stuff in it. And it was really complicated and hard. And I talked to Paul about it, and Paul said, oh yeah, take a look at this. And he'd written like a 10-line Groovy script that simplified how to use it down to incredibly simple form, because he just does things like that, and it's dazzling. So I just really recommend, if you ever get a chance to see Paul make a presentation, or even more importantly, get a chance to look at his slides, then I definitely recommend that.
There is a blog post which you included in the show notes from Rick Scarborough,
yeah,
who actually has an example as the one that you were describing, like using Jink to query like a JSON file,
right?
Which I think is a really good example, because you see actually what Jink is about.
I think that's great, because that is an area that it's one of those areas where people sometimes don't realize they really need this until they see that, and they go, oh, wow, that's going to make my life so much easier, because so much data is coming from RESTful web services in JSON format now. And there's, of course, there's already databases like MongoDB that use JSON as a native format, well, BSON, but whatever. But how do you query it? How do you search for it? And of course, MongoDB uses JavaScript as its querying language, and that's okay. I mean, it's it's up to you whether you like that idea or not. But Jink, it makes it a nice little DSL, nice little domain specific language for doing that. And I think that's very attractive. By the way, another interesting little feature that Dirk Koenig, the infamous Dirk Koenig, who was the original lead author on Groovy in Action, tweeted about the fact that GitHub Copilot, the AI-driven pair programmer, as they call it, supports Groovy as well. Have you ever used GitHub Copilot, by the way?
I have never. Used it.
I've been playing with this thing, and I wouldn't say I have a love-hate relationship with it. I'd say I have a like dislike. You know, I either really like it or I'm not sure about it relationship with it. For those who are not aware, GitHub Copilot is trained, it's an AI that's trained on GitHub repositories, but in order for you to use it and use it, it's got a plugin inside IntelliJ, which is where I use it. In order for you to use it, you have to log into your GitHub account. And therefore, every time you start to type code, GitHub Copilot will make suggestions. It'll say, oh, is this what you're trying to write? And it'll suggest this ton of multiple lines of code. And you just hit the tab key and accept all of it. And I really like it because it's right a lot, but I worry about it because it's also wrong a lot. And the problem is that because it's trained on actual projects and even more trained on your own code, the code that it suggests always looks plausible. It looks about right, but you really have to be careful because it could be just off enough that you just don't recognize that, oh, there's an error there. So it just really puts a huge premium on writing test cases, you know, which of course we should be doing anyway. But there was a series, a tweet stream last week, I think, by one of the heads of one of the executives at GitHub. I can't remember who it was specifically. And they made this bold claim that like half of the contributions they're seeing in some GitHub repositories are coming from GitHub Copilot, that they're getting these suggestions. And he expects within 5 years, it'll be up to like 80%. And there's always the joke that we're going to put ourselves out of a job here, which is like, yeah, good luck with that, you know? But I found it interesting. One, I'm still enjoying playing with it more or less until it drives me crazy. But also, as I say, Dirk pointed out that Copilot works on Groovy as well. By the way, if you do the GitHub Copilot website, the examples that they use right on the front page are either TypeScript or Go or Python or Ruby. They don't even mention Java or anything JVM related.
They have one Java file. I just opened.
Oh yeah, they're there. And you have to scroll down,
Java.
Right?
Yeah.
You scroll down, they've got a person.java and you can see all that. And it just shows how, I mean, when I first got into the training business, when I got into the industry back around 2000, Java was the hot topic. I mean, I used to teach a Java training class every week practically. Now, apparently, I'm not in any of the hot areas anymore. I'm surprised they don't have a Rust example or whatever, but it is nice to hear that it supports Groovy as well. But I have not, I mean, other than doing little hello world examples, I have not tried to test it with Groovy code at all, but we'll have to see how that develops over time.
How do you use it? Do you use it with IntelliJ or?
Yeah. It's a plugin in IntelliJ, and it does require you to verify, you know, to log in to GitHub and verify that, yes, you're giving it permission to look at your stuff. And then as you are typing, you type a line of code or just put in a variable and it goes, oh, is this the code you're trying to write? And it shows it all in an italicized font. And if you just hit the tab key, you accept all that code. And unfortunately, there's no way to accept just part of it. You kind of have to grab it all. But there's also a tab for GitHub Copilot where you could click on the tab and see a bunch of alternative suggestions as well for the current file. You could just click a button and refresh them and accept various alternatives. And as I say, they're all plausible. They all look about right, even when they're completely wrong. So you really have to watch it. You have to keep an eye on it, but it's an enormous time saver. My problem is I teach a lot of the same training classes over and over. So when I go to use an example, I type a couple lines and it goes, oh, do you mean this? And of course it's right because I've done it multiple times before. And I was like, no, I was going to show everybody how to develop that.
It is well trained, right?
It's trained. Yeah, exactly. Well trained. Oh, well, moving on from that. Let's see, what else do we have in the show notes? Anything you want to remark on?
Not really. So,
well, there's one comment. Speaking of Jink, we mentioned that before. IntelliJ, the current version of IntelliJ IDEA that I have is, actually, let me just check real quick just to be 100% sure here. It's 2022.1.2 is my version of IntelliJ Ultimate, but there's a beta or EAP, early access, of 2022.2. And it's been pointed out that, in fact, that supports Jink in Groovy 4. So the 2022.2 version, when it is finally released, will have Jink support inside Groovy 4 and everything. So I'm glad to see that there are people at IntelliJ who still at least care somewhat about Groovy as well. So I just wanted to mention.
Yeah, they are supporting, like, it's cool. I think one of the things that I saw in IntelliJ, they have removed, I think, the Grails integration.
I
know by default, you have to add a plugin, which before was like baked in, and now you have to add like the extension.
Oh, it's not a baseline plugin anymore. When you just install IntelliJ, it doesn't come with it, but the plugin is there. Yeah, and it still seems to work just fine. But yeah, it's not one of the automatic ones, I don't think, anymore. Getting away from IntelliJ, there was a blog post just like yesterday or the day before from Paul King. I meant to bring this up as well, because this is the big thing that's coming in the future of Java. In Java 19, they're talking about this being a really high impact release because they're finally bringing in the Project Loom beta, if you will. They don't call them betas there, they call it what is it called? Preview edition. So the first preview of Project Loom will be in Java 19. And for those who are not aware, that's the virtual threads. That's what they were calling fibers for a while, but they've changed their mind and started calling virtual threads. And Paul King wrote a blog post about how you can experiment with this with Groovy now using the Jeepers framework, GPARS. And you have to have the early access version of Java 19 to do this. But of course, Paul makes it all look simple again, using actors and parallel streams and all those things. And I'm like, okay. I mean, I've been using virtual threads in the sense that I've been using coroutines in Kotlin for years now. And still, nobody has adequately explained to me what virtual threads buy me that coroutines didn't. You know, they're talking about structured concurrency. Again, Kotlin's had structured concurrency in it for years now. But, you know, we'll see. At any rate, that's coming in September. The first early access version, sorry, not early access. The first preview edition of Project Loom is scheduled to be added to Java 19 out in September. Yep. So if you're at all interested in that, then take a look at Paul's blog post on Jeepers meets virtual threads. That's what he's got in there. There's a couple other introductory type tutorials. I saw this YouTube video, which totally surprised me. I'd never heard about this at all. Oops, sorry. And it was called, it's called, wait a minute, I'm trying to find the link now. Where was it? Oh, here, the one on planning implementation in Oracle EPM. It was an introduction to Groovy, a YouTube webinar run by these guys, Joe Altman and Kevin Whalen. I never heard of them, talking about planning implementation in Oracle EPM. And the whole thing said, yeah, we got to do this webinar because apparently Groovy is everywhere in this community. And these aren't necessarily object-oriented developers so much as people who do scripting and everything to do planning. And apparently Groovy is huge in that community, and I had no idea. You know, do you know anything about that at all?
No, not really.
Yeah, we're going to have to talk to somebody over there. We're going to have to make contact, because I just sort of saw the tweet, you know, and thought, wow, let me go take a look at that. And I didn't watch the whole webinar, but it's fascinating to see there's another community where they rely on basically Groovy scripting, you know, just like the other place that used to do that was SOAP-based web services, right? There was SOAP UI use Groovy scripting, and also Jenkins has a plugin that uses Groovy scripting. You know, there's these places you just don't necessarily think of that are seriously using Groovy in non-traditional server-side Java development ways, but rather as a nice scripting tool for automating processes and things like that.
I think Adaptavist had like a couple of I think they were writing like maybe I'm saying it completely wrong, but I think they were like extending Jira via Groovy scripts to like write like Jira automation.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, Groovy is used in places that we have no idea.
Of course, I added one link almost on purpose to embarrass the creator, James Clee, of course, who's part of the Grails team, or at least was, actually wrote a Groovy Excel builder that uses Apache Poi to create Excel files using Groovy. And he'd written it a couple of years ago, but it came up on a tweet recently when they were talking about, I think Shimon was talking about creating Excel spreadsheets with Groovy, and James just felt obligated to say, you know, by the way, I built this years ago, and put a link to it. And I thought, oh, we've got to include that, because he's probably horrified that we're including it here with Excel.
So it's really nice. There is another library who Vladimir at Musketeer on Twitter, he wrote, called the website is spreadsheet.dsl.builders.
Oh, right. So what was that one again? What's it called?
Spreadsheet.dsl.builders. I don't know how, I didn't know that builders was a valid domain name.
It's not coming up. Oh, I spelled it wrong.
I will put it in the chat.
No, I got it. He supports
both Groovy and Java. And of course, if you like write the Excel files with Groovy, they are like nicer to read, because this is kind of a place where a DSL really shines to write like an Excel file. And one of the nice things about this library is that so I have not used James' library. I have used this one. This one is also built on top of Apache Poi.
Right.
And one of the nice things that this library has is they have really nice support to query Excel files. Because one of the things that we typically do as developers is almost every application I have worked, they have at one point there is like functionality to export the data as an Excel file or as a CSV file, but almost never I have seen a test that actually tests that the thing that you are writing to the Excel file is correct. And typically that's because maybe developers were lazy, but also because testing, reading a file with Apache Poi and testing the contents is a bit cumbersome. And this library makes really easy to kind of query and say, like, when I download this Excel file, let me check that this data is actually inside the Excel file. So if anyone is working with Excel files, I think Spreadsheet Builder works with things beyond Excel. But I personally have used it with Excel. It works really nice.
I could have used that years ago. Yeah, I once had a very small consulting project where I was taking a ton of data that was already in Excel and porting it to a database. I mean, to a real database, you know, and it was actually using Apache Poi, but I didn't have the DSL capability. So I wrote in Groovy anyway, because it was just so much easier. But these would have been really convenient. Do you remember, by the way, what POI stands for? POI, the Apache Project POI. Do you know what that's?
No idea.
Yeah, you won't find it on the website either. I think Microsoft got to them because it was called Poor Obfuscation Interface. And like the Excel format, which called HSSF, which stood for horrible spreadsheet format. And I love that. And then they took away, of course, the definition somewhere. So they refer to that obliquely, but they don't actually ever spell it out anymore. So I imagine somebody at Microsoft said, wait a minute, you can't do that. But yeah, I mean, it's amazing how much data is out there that's actually stuck in Excel spreadsheets. And there's great that there's APIs to work with that data right in Groovy.
I mean, to be honest, I am really a beginner user of Excel, but there is people that do crazy things with Excel.
Yeah.
So there are companies which essentially like they run the whole company with Excel.
Well, it's also a transition path for people who aren't really developers to become developers, because they start off writing their Excel macros and then they start getting into like, Visual Basic or whatever, the VBA, and then they start going, oh, wow, I want to write real code here. And it's a nice path into it. I think that covers pretty much everything I had in the show notes. Is there, I think that's, there's a video that I included from our old friend, Cedric Champeau, that some guy named Sergio was also involved in.
Yeah.
Apparently that was how the Micronaut team practices that topic called developer productivity engineering, which sounds so pretentious to me, but at any rate, with the Gradle Enterprise tool. So you had a discussion with Cedric about that. Do you want to say anything about that one, by the way?
Yeah, we did an online webinar. The people from Gradle Inc., they invited us to, so they have, I think they have coined the term, or maybe at least the first time I heard about the developer productivity engineering, which they have like an acronym DPE.
Yeah.
And I think the first time I heard it was from them. And they're like doing like quite often like this kind of talks with people in companies. Like they are like kind of trying to really make hammer the point home, like you have to like optimize your builds, because at the end of the day you're losing out the productivity of your people, like if the builds are slow, if CI is slow, if all those things, right? And in Micronaut, we have been a huge user of Gradle since the beginning, and we still are. So we built all of our projects with Gradle, and since Cedric came, we have been improving a lot. As you can imagine, Cedric is Gradle developer extraordinaire, so he has been helping us to improve a lot our processes, and kind of we have like internal build plugins. And in that I think they posted the video to YouTube. So what we discussed essentially the challenges that we faced. So one of the challenges that we have in Micronaut is that Micronaut is a huge multi-project repository organization. If you want to think about it, we have like 60 models, something like that. In active development, we have like quite a small team scattered throughout the world, and anything that we can do to automate is really important for us, because not just in terms of speed, but also in terms of like being able to like jump into a project and have the same project structure the same way, so that you are able to contribute to any module. So we discussed things such as our usage of like internal build plugins, our usage. So Gradle is a sponsor of the Micronaut Foundation as well, and the Gradle Foundation. And one of the things that they have given us for free is we have a Gradle Enterprise instance. So we are using build cache, and they recently introduced one feature that we are still scratching the surface, but I think it will have a huge impact for us. Is we have been speaking about AI that we spoke before. They have introduced this thing called predictive test selection. The idea there is, I give you our example, our biggest example that we have. We have this thing called Micronaut, which is the equivalent to a Spring initializer. Is this generator of Micronaut applications that you can reach in launch.micronaut.io. And that code is also the code that powers the Micronaut command line interface, the Micronaut CLI. So that, as part of that project, we have a lot of functional tests. And those tests, they do things such as generate a project using, I don't know, Micronaut and AWS Lambda, and run the build so that you check that the project compiles and the test fast, right?
Right.
And we do that with all the features. And we have many tests that are completely unrelated with each other, right? So what happens for us is sometimes we change something in the Micronaut GCP feature, and a lot of tests that we know as humans that they are completely unrelated to that change, they are rerun, right? And for us, that means that not just in local development, but also on GitHub Actions in CI, the build is extremely slow. So the promise of predictive text selection is that with machine learning, which is always this marketing term, but with machine learning, they are like learning which tests should be run depending on which parts of your code you change. And that way, instead of like rerunning your whole test suite, you are just rerunning a part of your test suite. And what we have done is that we have enabled that in PRs. So when we actually release, we are actually running the whole thing. But for PRs, we are like using that thing so that we are enabled to like only rerun a partial subset of the test suite. And I think that's really, really interesting. As I said, we are still learning how to benefit from that. But that's quite a huge benefit that I think we're going to get from Gradle Enterprise.
Yeah, Eric Wendelin, I think, is the head of that project over at Gradle, and I've talked to him about some of this. I mean, there's so much to it. I imagine you know a lot more about it than I do. But as you say, it's predictive test selection. It's to guess which tests are the ones that are going to be most affected by any particular change. And of course, it does try to make sure it's somewhat pessimistic. It includes more tests than you might expect, but it's a really nice way of finding out which tests are important, are critical, rather than doing a complete rebuild, which can take a long time.
There are projects, we have this project, for example, which for us is, they're making a really good guess, because there are parts of the code base that are completely like, so one of the things that they have is, so in Gradle Enterprise, they have the whole thing for like detecting when you have like a flaky test. So they are able to understand exactly which parts of your code base are like more fragile and they have to rerun. So yeah, we are playing with that, and we talk about that in that webinar. So if anything is interested, I am a big, I really like Gradle a lot. I use it for not just Java project, but things such as my website and a lot of things. So we build the Micronaut podcast RSS feed, we build with Gradle, and we have recently moved the Micronaut docs index page to a static generated page, and we build with Gradle. So I'm a big fan of Gradle. And if anyone listening to the podcast is a big fan of Gradle as well, that probably is something that may interest you.
Okay, well, great. I think that covers pretty much everything I had in mind, and I'm glad that we were able to include a couple of those features. Again, if you have any other things you want to include in the show notes, especially things like additional Micronaut guides and other features there, feel free to add it. The show notes, as always, are in the GitHub repository, github.com/groovy-podcast. That's the organization, is Groovy-podcast. Under the name of the repository is Groovy Podcast, all one word. This is episode 87, otherwise known as season 6, episode 2. And we are glad everybody's able to make it. Thank you very much for coming. And hopefully it won't be quite so long before we do our next one again. I'm really glad you were available. It's always so hard to coordinate these schedules, but I'm glad we were able to do it. And of course, as we get closer to those additional conferences, GBCN, as well as the Great Conf coming in the fall, we'll try to do additional highlights. Maybe we can get some interviews with some people who are presenting at some of these places as well.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, thanks for making this episode possible.
I suppose I should mention, just for the sake of argument, I do personally have a new book coming out. Just was released in beta from Pragmatic Programmers, called Mockito Made Clear. It's a short 50-60 page book on the Mockito testing framework. And I feel funny bringing that up when we were spending all this time talking about Spock, which has a mock stubs and spies mechanism built right in, but this is the one in the Java world. So a bit about that. Otherwise, I don't have anything specifically
Cool.
personally that I want to bring up. Is there anything you want to bring up as well?
No, that's great. I didn't know about your book. I actually lost. I was not aware that you had like a book upcoming.
Oh yeah.
That's cool. That's
It's
something that I have to actually learn more, because we are using Mockito in some of our Micronaut guides. As you said, that's kind of the de facto standard for the JUnit mocking.
Well, they have at Pragmatic Programmers, this is at pragprog.com, they have what they call the Pragmatic Answers line. And Pragmatic Answers books are 50 to 60 pages, only ebooks, and they're like $10. You know, so they're quick and easy. And of course, it's taken me months to write this thing, but it's actually on pragprog.com on the homepage. The specific link would be /title/Mockito/Mockito-made-clear. And there it is if you're interested. It's in beta, so if you read it and have any feedback, now's the time, you know, so it'll change the eventual implementation if you like.
That's cool. That's absolutely great. Not today, but in the next one, it will be good if you actually talk about how you write these books.
Okay.
What are you using? If you are using Artidoc, what kind of software are you using to write them? How is the review process?
Yeah, you're right. That's a bigger topic, and we'll have to talk about the status, the state of the technical publishing industry, if you like, in a future podcast.
That will be a special episode of the Groovy podcast, completely related to Groovy.
I will tell you, however, that my Making Java Groovy book, which came out in 2013, is still sending me royalties of approximately $15 to $20 a quarter. So
I see.
Some people are reading it. So even after all this time, so that's good to know. Okay. Thank you very much for coming. And I'm going to end the recording at this point, and hopefully I will see you again shortly. Take care, man.
Thank you.